What happens when a beloved Hollywood legend sits down for what should be a routine chat show appearance, only to find himself facing the most hostile interrogation of his career? It only took 36 seconds for one presenter's shocking outburst to turn a friendly morning show into absolute chaos, revealing the ugly truth about what really goes on behind the cameras when the spotlight fades. The Loose Women studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy that Tuesday morning. Cameras rolled, lights blazed hot overhead, and the familiar purple and pink set gleamed under the studio lights. 4 women sat around the iconic table, ready to dive into another episode of daytime television's most talked about panel show. Denise Welch adjusted her microphone one final time, her jaw already set in that familiar way that regular viewers knew meant trouble was brewing. To her left sat Ruth Langsford, the show's veteran anchor, shuffling through her notes with practiced efficiency. Colleen Nolan occupied the third chair, her warm smile masking the tension she could already sense building in the air. At the far end, Janet Street Porter tapped her bright red nails against the desk, her sharp eyes scanning the studio for any sign of drama. The guest of the day was none other than Sean Bean, the legendary actor whose gravelly Yorkshire accent had captivated audiences for decades. From his breakout role as the doomed Boromir in Lord of the Rings to his unforgettable turn as Ned Stark in Game of Thrones, Bean had built a career on playing characters who met dramatic ends. Today, however, he had no idea he was walking into his own real-life dramatic finale. Bean settled into the guest chair with the easy confidence of someone who had done hundreds of interviews. His weathered face carried that familiar mix of ruggedness and vulnerability that had made him a fan favorite across generations. He wore a simple black blazer over a gray shirt, looking every inch the distinguished gentleman that his fans adored. Ruth opened the show with her trademark warmth, introducing their guest with genuine enthusiasm. The conversation started smoothly enough, with Bean discussing his latest project, a gritty crime drama where he played yet another character destined for tragedy. "It seems like you always end up playing characters who die," Colleen laughed, leaning forward with interest. "Do you ever get tired of meeting such dramatic ends on screen?" Bean chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Well, I suppose I've made a career out of it, haven't I? There's something quite liberating about playing characters who aren't afraid to face their fate head-on." The audience laughed along, clearly charmed by his self-deprecating humor. Even Janet, known for her cutting remarks, seemed genuinely entertained by his easygoing nature. But Denise had been unusually quiet, her fingers drumming against the desk in an increasingly agitated rhythm. Her colleagues had grown accustomed to her occasional mood swings, but today felt different. There was an electric tension in the air, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. Speaking of facing fate, Ruth continued, steering the conversation toward Bean's upcoming projects. "You've got quite a busy schedule ahead. How do you balance work with family life?" It was an innocent question, the kind of softball query that guests typically welcomed. Bean smiled and began to answer, talking about the importance of spending time at home between filming commitments. "Family is everything to me," he said, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "After all these years in the business, you realize that the relationships you build off camera are what really matter." The studio audience murmured their approval, clearly touched by his sincerity. Ruth nodded encouragingly, while Colleen smiled warmly. Janet even looked impressed by his heartfelt response. But Denise's expression had darkened considerably. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes narrowed as she watched Bean speak. The other presenters began to notice her shift in demeanor, exchanging subtle glances of concern. "That's all very touching," Denise suddenly interjected, her voice cutting through Bean's words like a blade. The sharp edge in her tone immediately changed the atmosphere in the studio. "But let's talk about what really matters here." Bean looked genuinely confused by her sudden hostility. "I'm sorry? Don't play innocent with me," Denise snapped, leaning forward aggressively. "You come on here talking about family and relationships, but what about your responsibilities to your fans? What about the promises you make?" The confusion on Bean's face deepened. Ruth tried to intervene, sensing the conversation taking a dangerous turn. "Denise, perhaps we should—" "No, Ruth," Denise cut her off sharply. "I'm tired of celebrities coming on this show and feeding us lines while they ignore the people who made them famous in the first place." The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. Camera operators exchanged worried glances, while the production team scrambled to figure out what was happening. Bean sat perfectly still, his years of professional experience helping him maintain composure despite the unexpected attack. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Bean said carefully, his voice remaining calm and measured. If I've done something to upset you, perhaps you could explain what you mean. His reasonable response only seemed to inflame Denise further. Her face flushed red, and her voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio wince. What I mean is that you actors think you can just show up, smile pretty, and expect everyone to fawn all over you, but some of us see right through it. Colleen looked horrified by her colleague's behavior. Denise, this is completely inappropriate. Sean is our guest, and he deserves to be treated with respect. Respect? Denise laughed bitterly. What about respecting the audience? What about respecting the people who tune in every day expecting honest conversation, not some rehearsed publicity nonsense? Bean's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. I came here today in good faith, ready to have an honest conversation about my work and my life. I'm not sure what's triggered this reaction, but I assure you that everything I've said has been completely genuine. Janet, never one to back down from controversy, tried to diffuse the situation with humor. Well, this is certainly more exciting than our usual Tuesday morning chat about the weather, but Denise was beyond reason now. She turned on Janet with equal venom. This isn't a joke, Janet. This is about integrity. This is about holding these people accountable for their actions. What actions? Ruth demanded, her professional composure finally cracking. Sean has done nothing but answer our questions politely and professionally. This behavior is absolutely unacceptable. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether they were witnessing genuine drama or some kind of elaborate setup. But the raw emotion in Denise's voice and the obvious discomfort of everyone else made it clear that this was very real. Bean finally showed the first signs of losing his patience. His Yorkshire accent became more pronounced as his voice took on a steely edge. Now look here, I don't know what your problem is, but I won't sit here and be insulted for no reason. I came here as a favor to the show, not to be ambushed by someone with an axe to grind. A favor? Denise shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made the studio microphones squeal with feedback. You think you're doing us a favor by gracing us with your presence? The arrogance is absolutely staggering. Colleen stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. That's enough, Denise. This has gone way too far. Sean, I apologize on behalf of the show. This is not how we treat our guests. But Denise wasn't finished. She rose from her seat as well, pointing an accusatory finger at Bean. Don't you dare apologize for me, Colleen. Someone needs to call out this entitled behavior. These celebrities think they can just waltz in here and expect us to bow and scrape. Bean's composure finally cracked completely. He stood up slowly, his full height imposing in the bright studio lights. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect on movie sets around the world. Right, that's quite enough of this nonsense. I don't know what's got into you, love, but I won't be spoken to like this by anyone. I've been nothing but polite and professional since I walked through that door. The studio erupted into chaos as Denise's rage reached its boiling point. The words that came out of Denise's mouth next would be replayed across social media for weeks to come. Her face contorted with fury as she jabbed her finger toward Bean with vicious intent. Polite and professional? She screamed, her voice cracking with the strain. You call it professional to show up here unprepared, giving us the same tired answers you've been recycling for 20 years? You think we're idiots who can't see through your act? Bean's eyes flashed dangerously. The same intensity that had made him legendary on screen now focused entirely on the woman attacking him without cause. What act? I came here to talk about my work, my family, the things that matter to me. If that's not good enough for you, then maybe you should find yourself a different job. The studio gasped collectively. Ruth's mouth fell open in shock, while Colleen covered her face with her hands, unable to watch the carnage unfolding before her. Janet sat frozen, her usual quick wit abandoning her in the face of such unprecedented chaos. Different job? Denise's laugh was sharp and bitter. I've been doing this job longer than you've been pretending to be an actor. I've interviewed real stars, people with actual talent, not washed up, has been trading on past glory. The insult hit its mark. Bean's face darkened, and for a moment, the studio held its collective breath. Here was a man who had faced down orcs and dragons on screen, who had portrayed kings and warriors with unwavering strength, but nothing had prepared him for this kind of unprovoked personal attack. Washed up? His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. Lady, I've forgotten more about acting than you'll ever know about presenting. At least when I do my job, I don't spend my time tearing down innocent people for cheap entertainment. Ruth finally found her voice, though it shook with emotion. Denise, stop this right now. You're embarrassing yourself and this show. Sean has done nothing to deserve this treatment. But Denise whirled on Ruth with equal fury. Don't you dare tell me how to do my job, Ruth. Just because you're content to sit there and lob softball questions doesn't mean the rest of us have to play along with this charade. Charade? Ruth's professional mask slipped completely. The only charade here is you pretending to be a journalist while behaving like a playground bully. The audience began to murmur among themselves, their discomfort growing by the second. Some people started to get up from their seats, clearly wanting to escape the toxic atmosphere that had consumed the studio. Colleen made one last desperate attempt to restore order. Please, everyone, let's just take a moment to calm down. We're on live television. Think about what message we're sending to our viewers. The message is honesty, Denise spat. The message is that some of us won't be bought and paid for by celebrity handlers and publicity machines. Bean had heard enough. His Yorkshire temper, usually kept carefully in check, finally boiled over completely. Bought and paid for? You absolute lunatic. Nobody's bought me anything. I agreed to come on this show because I thought it might be a pleasant way to spend a morning. More fool me for thinking I'd be treated with basic human decency. Human decency? Denise's voice reached a new octave of hysteria. What about the decency you show to your fans when you phone in these performances? What about the decency you show to audiences who pay good money to watch you sleepwalk through another role? My performances? Bean's voice rose to match hers now, all pretense of politeness abandoned. I've spent 40 years perfecting my craft, working with some of the finest directors and actors in the world. I don't need career advice from someone whose biggest achievement is stirring up controversy on daytime television. Janet finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a squeak. Perhaps we should go to a commercial break? No commercial break, Denise snapped, without taking her eyes off Bean. Let's finish this conversation right here, right now. Let's talk about how you've been coasting on your Lord of the Rings fame for decades. Coasting? Bean's face turned purple with rage. I've made over 60 films and television shows. I've worked constantly for 4 decades, taking on challenging roles that other actors wouldn't touch. If that's coasting, then what do you call sitting behind a desk asking other people about their lives? The personal nature of the attacks was escalating beyond anything the show had ever experienced. Ruth looked desperately toward the production booth, silently pleading for someone to intervene. The camera operators continued filming, unsure whether they should stop rolling or capture every moment of the unprecedented meltdown. I call it holding celebrities accountable, Denise shot back. I call it asking the hard questions that your usual interviewers are too scared to ask. Hard questions? Bean laughed harshly. You haven't asked me a single question about my work, my process, or anything remotely professional. You've done nothing but hurl personal insults like a child having a tantrum. Colleen was openly weeping now, her mascara running down her cheeks as she watched her colleague destroy her own career in real time. Denise, please, you're better than this. This isn't who you are. This is exactly who I am, Denise declared proudly. I'm someone who won't be intimidated by entitled celebrities who think their fame makes them untouchable. Bean shook his head in disbelief. Entitled? I've been sitting here taking your abuse for 10 minutes without fighting back. I've answered every question you've bothered to ask between insults. If anyone's acting entitled here, it's the woman who thinks she has the right to attack people for no reason. No reason? Denise's voice cracked again. The reason is that I'm sick of fake people giving fake answers to fake questions. I'm sick of the whole rotten system. Ruth had heard enough. Rising from her seat with the dignity that had made her a respected broadcaster for decades, she looked directly into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize to our viewers and to our guests for what you're witnessing today. This is not representative of the standards we maintain on this show. Don't apologize for me, Denise screamed, spinning to face Ruth. I'm the only one here with the courage to tell the truth. The truth? Bean's voice dripped with contempt. The truth is that you've lost your mind. The truth is that you're having some kind of breakdown on national television and taking it out on an innocent person. The words hit Denise like a physical blow. For a moment, her face crumpled, and the mask of righteous anger slipped to reveal something far more vulnerable underneath. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by an even more furious determination. Breakdown. she whispered, her voice suddenly deadly calm. "I'll show you a breakdown." The studio fell silent, everyone sensing that whatever was about to happen would cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Bean stood perfectly still, his hands clenched at his sides, waiting for the next assault. When Denise spoke again, her voice was quiet but filled with such venom that everyone in the studio could feel it. "Get out!" The two words hung in the air like a death sentence. Bean's eyebrows shot up in surprise, while the other presenters looked at each other in horror. "I beg your pardon?" Bean said slowly. "You heard me. Get out of my studio. Get out of my show. Get out of my sight." Ruth gasped audibly. "Denise, you can't do that. You don't have the authority to—" "I have every authority," Denise cut her off sharply. "This is my show, and I want him gone, now." The studio erupted into complete pandemonium as the final confrontation reached its explosive climax. Bean stared at Denise for a long moment, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked almost like pity. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute finality. "Your studio?" He looked around at the chaos surrounding them, taking in Ruth's horrified expression, Colleen's tears, and Janet's shocked silence. "Your show? Last I checked, this was supposed to be a team effort." "Don't lecture me about teamwork," Denise spat, though her voice had lost some of its earlier fire. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the magnitude of what she had done was beginning to sink in. "Just leave." But Bean wasn't finished. He took a step closer to the panel desk, his presence commanding despite the circus atmosphere. "You know what the real tragedy is here? You had a chance to have an interesting conversation with someone who spent his entire life telling stories. Instead, you chose to create a spectacle." Ruth found her voice again, though it trembled with emotion. "Sean, please don't judge all of us by this behavior. This is not who we are as a show." Bean nodded toward Ruth with genuine respect. "I know that. You've been nothing but professional, and I appreciate that." His gaze shifted to Colleen, who was still dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "You too, love. This isn't your fault." Even Janet received a small nod of acknowledgement. "And you, Janet, at least you tried to lighten the mood when things got ugly." The kindness in his voice toward his other hosts only made Denise's behavior look more grotesque by comparison. She stood there, isolated in her fury, watching as Bean demonstrated the exact grace and professionalism she had accused him of lacking. "How touching," Denise said, but the bite had gone out of her words. "A little farewell speech for your adoring fans." Bean turned to look at her directly, and when he spoke, his voice carried no anger, just a deep sadness. "You know what? I actually feel sorry for you. Whatever's eating you up inside, whatever's making you lash out at people who've done nothing wrong, I hope you find a way to deal with it that doesn't involve hurting innocent people." The unexpected compassion in his words seemed to deflate Denise completely. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she looked uncertain. "I don't need your pity," she mumbled, but the fight had gone out of her voice. "It's not pity," Bean said quietly. "It's concern for a fellow human being who's clearly struggling with something. But I won't stand here and be your punching bag while you work through it." He began to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and dignified. The small action somehow carried more power than all the shouting that had preceded it. Ruth made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Sean, please, if you could just give us a moment to—" "No, Ruth," Bean interrupted gently. "She's made her feelings perfectly clear, and I'm not going to subject myself or you ladies to any more of this. Some battles aren't worth fighting." As he unclipped the microphone pack from his belt, the studio fell into an eerie silence. The audience sat transfixed, watching a masterclass in dignity under pressure. Even the camera operator seemed reluctant to move, as if sudden motion might shatter the strange spell that had settled over the chaos. Colleen wiped her eyes one final time and looked up at Bean with admiration. "Sean, I just want you to know that not all of us feel this way. You've been nothing but gracious through all of this." Bean smiled at her, the first genuine smile he had managed since the confrontation began. "Thank you for that. It means more than you know." He placed his microphone on the guest chair and straightened his jacket with the same care he might have taken before stepping onto a movie set. The simple gesture somehow restored order to the mayhem around him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the stunned audience directly, "I apologize that your morning entertainment turned into something unpleasant. That was never my intention, and I'm sure it wasn't yours either. A few members of the audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then building into sustained appreciation for his handling of an impossible situation. The sound seemed to break the spell that had held the studio in its grip. Denise watched the applause with growing horror, finally understanding what she had done. The audience wasn't clapping for her righteous stand against celebrity entitlement. They were showing their support for the man she had attacked without cause. "This is ridiculous," she said weakly, but nobody was listening to her anymore. Bean walked toward the studio exit with unhurried steps, nodding politely to crew members as he passed. At the door, he paused and looked back one final time. "Ruth, Colleen, Janet, it was a pleasure meeting you, even under these circumstances. I hope the rest of your show goes more smoothly." He didn't look at Denise at all. As the studio door closed behind him with a soft click, the silence that followed was deafening. Ruth stared at the door, then at her notes, then at the camera that was still rolling. "Well," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "that was certainly unexpected." Colleen had stopped crying but looked shell-shocked. "I can't believe what just happened. In 30 years of television, I've never seen anything like that." Janet, for once in her life, seemed completely at a loss for words. She opened her mouth several times, but nothing came out. And Denise? She sank into her chair like a deflated balloon, the full weight of her actions finally hitting her. The righteous anger that had fueled her outburst was gone, replaced by a growing awareness of the professional suicide she had just committed on live television. Ruth, drawing on decades of broadcasting experience, tried to restore some semblance of normalcy to the show. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll be discussing today's showbiz news with our entertainment correspondent." But as the camera stopped rolling and the studio lights dimmed for the commercial break, everyone knew that there would be no returning to normal after what they had just witnessed. The remaining three presenters sat in stunned silence, while crew members whispered among themselves about what they had just captured on tape. Denise stared at the empty guest chair where Sean Bean had been sitting just minutes before, the microphone he had placed there serving as a stark reminder of how quickly everything had gone wrong. In the space of less than 15 minutes, a routine celebrity interview had transformed into one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history. And somewhere outside the studio, a legendary actor walked away with his dignity intact, leaving behind a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting personal demons loose in the harsh light of live television. The storm was over, but the aftermath was just beginning.